You will be able to color grade your images the way you like without the use of presets and understanding what you're doing to get the results you want. What's up everyone, my name is Christian Lombardi. I'm a content creator here at HBLC and welcome to another tutorial. Today we're gonna be using Lightroom to color tone in different moods with different color schemes that will take your editing to the next level. So let's jump into the screen and edit those photos now. Let's start with the basic adjustments. So at first we can see in the histogram up here that the exposure is a little bit underexposed. So I'm gonna lift my exposure a little. I'm gonna increase the contrast to increase the details and the rocks of the background. And I'm gonna bring down a little bit of the highlights, lifting up the shadows to recover a little bit of details in the blacks. And pressing my Alt key, I'm gonna lift the white point to get those white tones popping. I think like this is gonna be about enough, plus 30. With the blacks, we're gonna press again the Alt key to check when we're clipping, and when in the point where we start clipping the blacks, we will stop pushing the blacks. So I think this is a good starting point for the photo. We can see the before and after here. We already see like different in tones. So with the vibrance, we'll push a little bit of saturation in the weaker colors of the image. And we can see that those teal tones in the water start like lifting up a little bit more. And one tool that I don't normally use all the time and I think is super useful in this kind of scenarios where you have a lot of mist in the environment is the dehaze tool. So don't go overboard. Remember, photo editing is subjective, it's different to everyone. I always say that less is more, especially in editing. Subtle details generally take you a longer way than actually trying to overdo your images. So I'm gonna push the dehaze a little bit into my photo because I want to recover the details of the rocks in the background. So I'm gonna go for around plus 28, I think is a good number, plus 26 is a good number. And I think that's it for the basic curve. Another thing that is really good to remember, if you're going to use lens correction in your image, use it at the beginning because it's going to change the tonality of your image. Like here, you can see when I disable, the image goes way darker. And when I activate it, you can see that I started recovering all the details in the borders of an image that are caused because of my lens that has vignetting. Now we have to readjust a little bit because after taking the vignetting off, we can see that the shadows got way too bright for my taste. So I'm just gonna bring the shadows a little bit down. And now we're gonna jump to the curve tone. The curve tone for this image and for most of my images, because this is the way I edit, this is my style, I tend to lift a little bit the black points to get those gray kind of tones in my darkest areas. Now I'm gonna push up the highlights a little bit, creating like an S curve on my image because I want to increase the contrast a little bit. And then I'm gonna bring my white point in the curve and I'm gonna pull it down a little bit to calm those harsh tones in the water. It's done. So I got my whites the way I want it and I got my blacks the way I want them. My main idea for color toning this image is putting a little bit of emphasis in the blue tones and the teal tones of the water, and at the same time getting some of those details and that saturation back from the rock behind, like you can see here. So I'm gonna start with the blues and then we're gonna jump into the oranges and the reds and see how we affect with the HSL each of the areas of the photo. I'm gonna push my aqua tones to a darker blue and my blue tones to a definitely more like purplish, deeper blue. Let's move with the saturation. I'm going to actually decrease my saturations in the blues and increase it in my aquas. It is a very subtle change on my blues, but you can see the effect that it's taking into it. Now, I'm going to jump into luminance of my blues and the aquas. I will definitely take it down to recover a little bit of the detail that has been created in the foam of the water. And the same is going to happen with my deeper blue tones. I'm gonna take them down for a little. Now, once we have calibrated the blues, I'm going to jump into the oranges, yellows, and reds. So for the oranges, I want to make emphasis in the rocks at the back and try to create a contrast. Remember that the complementary color of blue is yellow or orange, so that's where it comes the famous orange and teal color grading. So here we're gonna try to do like a softer and more subtle version of it, So I'm gonna push my yellows down towards the oranges and the oranges a little bit more towards the reds. That is going to give me that tonality here. And then I'm gonna bring my reds up towards the oranges. Let's saturate a little bit the yellows and the oranges and desaturate the reds. And then we see in the luminance what we can get out. So for the reds, again, we see that there is not too much details in the red in this image. Now let's go to the orange luminance. For this one, I think I like how it brings the detail down in the foliage here of the image. So let's jump into the yellow tones of the luminance. So we recover a little bit of the details here in the top of the rocks. Let's jump into split toning. In this case, I think I'm going to infuse a little bit of those shadows on those highlights. So for the highlights in these photos, as you can see, we're editing the ocean and there is a gray sky in the background. For the highlights, I'm going to go and definitely jumping with some blue tones. If you click the Alt key, you can see the tone that you're infusing 100% saturated, and as soon as you release it, it will go back to normal as you have it. Right now we have it in 0, so when I release the bottom, we'll see no changes, but sparingly and softly, we're gonna start increasing. I think already 30, 20 is way too much, so try to keep those numbers down. It's always less is more. In this case, I'm going to put a little bit of red tones and orange tones in the shadows. I'm just gonna push them to, I think 14 looks good. Let's see the before and after. I actually think it's too much, so let's take it down a little notch. Yeah, I think I'm sold. Yeah. 7 is very good. 7 is very good. Let's go with the detail tab. Nowadays cameras are super sharp, and most even entry-level cameras are going to give you a very good level of sharpness from starting. I always recommend to take it all the way down to 0 and then see how the image look at 100% zoom, and then you can see on the details if you actually need some sharpening. So I'm gonna put my sharpening to around 30, and I'm gonna move with my square, my targeting point in the rocks to see the details. And with the masking slider, I'm going to choose, pressing Alt, which part of the image I'm sharpening. So I'm gonna drag my masking as much as I can to recover only the details I really want to emphasize on. I'm going to bring down the detail a little bit. Again, I'm taking care of this. So when I click on detail and Alt, I can see all the areas that have been digitally sharpened. I'm going to put it down to around, I think 18 to 20. Let's go with 19. And then the radius is going to be the same. I think that's pretty good. I don't think we need any noise reduction. This photo was taken in ISO 100, so there is very little noise. So the detail tab is finished for now. We already did lens correction. We don't need to do any transformation in this photo. I think the straight lines are pretty straight. And let's jump into calibration. So I'm just gonna go and tell Lightroom, hey, I wanna change a little bit of the tonality of my blues and my oranges, but I don't want to make a crazy thing. I always want to keep that natural kind of look. I think -6 + 8, maybe put a little bit of magenta in, and finish, done. First photo, before and after. All right, so let's jump into our second photo of today. This photo was also taken in Tasmania, and with this photo, what I want to do is to bring those kind of intriguing jungle, dark vibes into this image, create a lot of contrast and make those green to go to more bluish kind of tones. Let's go first with the basic adjustment. So I'm gonna bring the exposure a little bit down, just a little notch, because I want to bring those blacks really in. I'm going to increase a little bit of the contrast and bring the highlights way down. This photo, as you can see here in the background, the highlights are very harsh. It was taken in probably midday, so it's very harsh highlights. And the shadows, I'm gonna bring them a little bit up to recover the detail on those tree barks and get more detail in the foliage in general. Now, with the white points, in this photo in particular, I'm going to start bringing them down. So white tones down and black point, let's bring the Alt key again to see if it's clipping. We're starting to clip here. That's it. I'm gonna leave it there. I don't want to lose more detail. And with the vibrance, I'm going to go up a notch. Let's go +10, and the saturation down. And you're gonna tell me, well, Christian, if you're pushing vibrance up, why are you taking saturation down? And in this case, it's because I want to give power to the weaker tones, to the tones that don't have that much protagonism in this photo. So I'm bringing my saturation a little bit down. Basic tab is done. Let's jump to the tone curve. My 3 dots are done, and now I'm gonna start moving the curve. I'm gonna leave my black points. I really want to leave them here because I want that gray kind of not completely black tones on my shadows, and I'm gonna push my shadows a little bit down to create contrast and my mids a little bit up. I'm going to create a little bit of a harsher S curve than in the previous photo, and again my white point is coming down, and I think I'm really liking this one. You can already feel the moody vibes on it. Let's go into the hue section. So now for the hues, for the oranges here, if I go extremes, you can see how the oranges become very green or it become very red depending on where I'm moving them. I'm gonna move them a little bit towards the reds. This is to create a slight contrast because, as you know, red is the complementary color of green. So if we put these two tones in the same images, it's going to create a very harmonious kind of combination. Now the yellows, I'm gonna start seeing what they do in the foliage. So if I push them towards the oranges, you can see how all the leaves and the vegetation starts to turn very, very, very orange. But I'm gonna go more towards the greens. So the yellows towards the greens. And I'm going to use the greens to push my greens towards the blues. And this is going to give me that kind of jungle vibe. Now you're gonna say, well, Christian, this looks crazy. This looks disgusting. But wait, bear with me a minute. We're gonna get into that in a second. So the aquas, I'm gonna again push them towards the blues because that's the aim that I have here, is to push the greens towards the blues. This is it. I think the hues are done. We jump into the saturation section and we go straight for the greens. This is the main goal of this area. So we're gonna bring them all the way down. I want them to feel like Jurassic Park, like very deep greens. So I'm gonna bring the saturation down and the luminance, I'm gonna bring it down as well. It's gonna start to take those tones that I'm really looking for. For the yellows, I'm going to bring them down. I'm gonna go down and take them down, and the oranges, I'm gonna bring them up because as you can see, the wooden path here is going to be the leading line of my photo. So I want people to pay attention to it. For the split toning, as we were saying before, we're trying to do a green and a red kind of color combination. I'm gonna go now for the hues in the highlights, which my highlights are mostly in the greens kind of sections of my image. So I'm looking for this bluish kind of green-blue tone. So I think 160 hue, maybe 158. And the saturation, this is going to be a very minor adjustment. It's going to be around 6. And then for my shadows, as I'm infusing them mostly in the path that you can see, I'm gonna go for the orange-red kind of vibe, like a very earthy wooden vibe. Let's go for a 5. And it's a very subtle change. You can see when I turn it on and off. With the sharpening, let's do this very quick. Again, we just sharpen in the area that we want it. I'm gonna use it around 30, 25. And the details, I'm gonna bring it down to 13. The radius, I'm gonna go down for 0.8. Now let's jump into the calibration. So for the calibration section here, I'm going to be very gentle with this photo. I'm gonna push a little bit of tint in the shadows towards the greens. So I'm gonna go like -8. And for my green primary, I'm gonna push it a little bit towards the blues because that's the end goal that I want to make in this photo. I'm gonna increase a little bit of the saturation on those oranges. And I think for me, this photo is doing it this way. So now let's go with the local adjustments. This is just to create a little bit more interest, to guide the eye of the viewer. So I'm going to create a graduated filter with a little bit of minus exposure. This is to create like a darker area around the trees. And that's going to be applied in both sides of the image. I'm going to create one in the top as well. and you're going to see how the mood and the illumination in the photo starts to change quite a lot. It's pretty good. Now let's go with a brush, and the brush, I'm gonna use it very specifically to increase a little bit of that interest in the bridge, because again, this wooden path is what is going to call the viewer attention. I'm gonna make it smaller using the lower bracket here. Bam, 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 and we got it. This is it. It's very subtle, and I think this is pretty good. Let's go and see the before and after. Boom, very yellow tones, very bright greens, and bam, we go with a moodier jungle kind of vibe. So the last photo that we're gonna be editing today is this beautiful shot of South Australia. This photo, we're gonna be editing it with an orange and teal kind of look, the famous Hollywood film, holiday kind of vibe. If you have any doubt of any of the tools that we're using in this video, go and check out this video where I explain to you all the basics of Lightroom. And without any delay, let's go and jump into the last photo. So for this photo, I'm going to start with a crop. And this is going to be different from the rest because I'm going to teach you a technique of how to enhance those rays of light that were hitting the rocks. So I want to know my space of where am I going to put those filters before I do anything to the photo. So I'm going to do my rule of third again. This is going to be my final crop. For this photo, we can see in the histogram that it's a little bit overexposed. So I'm going to bring the exposure a little bit down. Maybe let's go with -60 to recover a little bit of detail in the sky. Now I'm going to bring the highlights down and my shadows up. I'm going to recover as much detail as possible with this. In terms of the whites, I'm also gonna bring them down to soften the look. And my blacks are going to be brought down by pressing Alt and C when I'm clipping. I always like to check my blacks so I'm never losing information. And I think around this point, it's pretty okay. You can see here the contrast that has been created, but we still retain all the information there in those rocks. I think this photo will do very well with a little bit of the haze. Let's go and move it up. And remember, when you increase the dehaze, you are going to increase the saturation by default in your image. And this is something I don't want to do. I'm going to go and I'm gonna drop my saturation down. And I'm going to bring my vibrance up by a little bit as well. So let's do it in +11 and -6. Let's continue. Now let's go to the tone curve. Here we already have a lot of contrast. My S curve is going to be very, very subtle. I'm just going to do 2 points, lift up the highlights a little bit and dip the shadows just a little touch. I'm happy with this. I'm gonna jump into the HSL. For the hues here, we see that the reds are still not taking too much of a protagonism here. So I'm just gonna go and put them a little bit orange, but the oranges are going to be a very big part of this image. I'm gonna be very gentle with them and just push a little bit towards the red. And then the yellows, I think I'm gonna push them as well. And the yellows are going to be affecting mostly the very, very highlights in the ocean and stuff. And I'm gonna go -35, and then with the blues. The blues here, I'm gonna take them towards teal. Teals in the aquas and teals in the blues. Just a little touch. Now we go with the saturation. In this case, I think my oranges and my yellows are very, very, very strong. So I'm gonna take them down just a little bit to balance the image a little bit more. And now the blues, I'm gonna saturate them a little bit more to bring the details and the interest in the ocean and the sky. For the luminance, I'm going to bring the aquas down and the blues down. This is going to give me a more pastel kind of opaque kind of blues. The luminance for the oranges and the yellows, I'm gonna bring them up a little bit. I think this is pretty good. The highlights, again, we're talking about orange and teal, so obviously my highlights are going to be orange. Let's go around 20. And the saturation, we're gonna go for, again, very subtle, 12. And for the shadows, we're talking again, orange and teal. I'm going to go for teal colors +15. I think this is looking gorgeous. I absolutely love it. It's muting a little bit of those oranges. I'm gonna bring it a little bit down. Let's go for 11. And for the calibration here, I'm gonna go for a more simplistic kind of approach. I'm going to bring my hue in the red primary to +19 and bring it down in the blues to -15. It's a very subtle change. We can see that we're starting to saturate things. So I'm gonna bring my saturation down for both my blue primary and my red primary. I'm gonna bring them to -17 and -16. We're done with the basic adjustments. Now, I was talking about the sun rays, so let's create like a simulation of the sunlight that is coming from the left of this image. I'm going to create a radial filter, and for this one, I'm going to put the feather 100%, the exposure up by 0.35. I'm going to decrease the dehaze to create a hazy kind of look, and I'm gonna take the temperature towards the yellows. I'm going to warm that area. And that's going to make the impression that the sun is actually glaring through the photo. It's a super warm and nice kind of thing. I absolutely love how this looks in the photos. Don't overdo it. Again, you can get really easily carried away with this, so I will not overdo it. Let's readjust. Remember, you can always go back and bring down a little bit the stuff that you have done. And I think we're done, guys. We can see the before and after in this image. I think the change is pretty drastic and it looks amazing. I absolutely love it. If you learned something new, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel. Welcome if you're new, and see you in the next video. Thank you so much.